welcome everybody. Thank you for coming on this short notice. In case you do not know who Joshua Oppenheimer is, I'm trying to condense it in 2 sentences. He became internationally known for 2 films he did, 2 documentary films he did, although they sort of go beyond anything you may have thought you knew about documentary and what they use, the things they utilize, and the methods they use to get a matter of truth out of their subjects. Played at hundreds of festivals, were Academy Award nominated, and Joshua was here 12 years ago with Act of Killing, and his second film, The Look of Silence, was also shown here at the Viennale. They're films that belong together. They deal with the aftermath of a genocide that happened in Indonesia in 1965, and Joshua spent many, many years there talking to people who were involved, who were perpetrators, and who managed to live out in the open freely, supported by society and never challenged for what they had done, and utilizes amazing methods in his films to get these people to finally maybe come to some sort of judgment, I would say. And I'm not the only one, I guess, who was very much expecting and what you would do next. And over the years, we got certain amounts of information in terms of that you were going to do something with Tilda Swinton and that it was going to be a musical. And of course, all these things started happening in my head. What is he going to do with Tilda Swinton and a musical? And the film that he made, and which was shown here, which you will not have the chance to see at the Viennale anymore, but hopefully in March when it comes out at the cinemas, is called The End. And it is a musical in the best sense of the word, but it's not that easy, of course, and I hope we can talk a little bit about the methods that you used for this film, how they are connected to the methods that you used in your other films as a documentary filmmaker. So that's enough from my side at this moment. I mean, it's obvious you like challenges that come through the subjects that you choose and the way you choose to film them. So, I mean, the challenge of creating a film like this as a musical must have been great, knowing that you came from a totally different area of filmmaking, which also has a totally different economy attached to it. You talked a little bit at the Q&As about the idea that's for the end and where it came from, and I think it's an obvious starting point and how to delve into maybe the conversation, because the idea for this film was also connected to the other 2 films that you had made previously, and maybe you could...
I just ask, thank you so much, Norman, that was a very generous and eloquent introduction to me. And I'm just curious, just so I know who I'm speaking with, who managed to see The End at the festival so far? So a good number of you. The End grew out of a desire to make a 3rd film in Indonesia with the oligarchs who came to power and wealth through the aftermath of genocide. Can I just think really irritating that I hate if I'm in the audience, but can I bother you, to trouble you to this? We have a completely empty first row. Are there any people who wouldn't mind filling it? Those of you who are like behind one, just so I'm like, yeah, that would be so nice. It'll just put me at ease. I was saying earlier I had the worst stage fright about speaking publicly before The Act of Killing came out. I think I won't freeze up. If I do, I'll just be very honest about it. But having faces closer to me would be really nice. Thank you so much. Amazing. We only need 1, 2. Yeah, we got it. Oh, thank you. That's lovely of you guys.
Talk.
Yeah. It's great. Then we can go through how I directed scenes. It was basically like this. Can you get in the front row, please? So I wanted to make a 3rd film in Indonesia about the oligarchs, the businessmen who enriched themselves in the aftermath of genocide, who came to power and through mass murder, and who were able to profit off the fact that the entire country was terrified of them. And I could not return to Indonesia after The Act of Killing came out. I still can't return to Indonesia. In fact, yesterday, maybe 2 days ago now, the son-in-law of the dictator Suharto, who came to power through the genocide, someone who really has vowed to carry on the legacy of the dictator, has just returned to power in Indonesia. So I don't see myself returning anytime soon. After that, when I realized I could not return to Indonesia, I started researching oligarchs who were involved with political violence elsewhere in the world. And there was an oil man in particular who had, first of all, this immortality project. He wanted to live forever. He was involved with all sorts of experimentation with life-extending drugs. And part of his immortality project, I would submit, was a bunker that he wanted to buy for his family. And we went and looked at the bunker together, and it had many of the facilities that you see in the end, and a huge art vault for the family's art collection, a wine cellar, hydroponic farming system so they could grow fresh seafood and use the shit and pee from the fish and the clams and the shellfish to fertilize the vegetables, which would in turn clean the water for the shellfish and the fish. So it had some of the same facilities, and when we visited the bunker, there were these questions that I was dying to ask, which were unmentionable. How would they cope with the guilt they felt for the catastrophe from which they were fleeing? How would they cope with remorse they felt for the loved ones they did not bring with them? How would they tell their story to a next generation that they intended to bring up in the bunker if they should have to stay there that long? And how might the stories they would tell as among the world's last survivors serve to whitewash their own pasts from themselves? How would they reassure themselves and make life livable for themselves through really the lies they would tell their progeny in this bunker? And then with all these status symbols, which were really about their legacy, the art collection, the trappings of wealth, what would they imagine that all of that meant in this abyss of meaninglessness into which they'd cast themselves? And I couldn't ask any of these questions, so they couldn't ask themselves these questions. If they were able to, they would not be on the market for a bunker. And on the way home, I looked at, on my laptop on the flight home, I put on one of my very favorite films as a way of just getting some distance on these questions and on what I would do. And I thought to myself, but before doing so, I actually thought to myself, the film I really would like to make with this family would be the Fly on the Wall documentary. And I'm not known for Fly on the Wall documentaries, but a Fly on the Wall documentary in this bunker 25 years after the world had ended, 25 years after the family moved in, and all of these questions were structuring their lives and would by then have transformed who they are and how they could love one another. And I realized I was never going to get to make that film. So instead, to try and think what I might make, I wanted a little distance, and I put on my laptop The Umbrellas of Cherbourg by Jacques Demy. And after that, I thought to myself, I know what I'll do. I'll make a musical. It'll be set in a bunker 25 years after the family moves in. I'll make the family American. This family was Asian. I'll make the family American because it's an quintessentially American genre. And it will be, and the title of this musical will be The End. And I knew that much, and it all came together in a kind of flash, and I never diverged from that. Yes, it's true, I realized that it would be a huge learning curve, which is one of the reasons the film from conception until today the journey took about 8 years. I'd never written a script before, not a script of any length. I'd never worked with actors. I'd certainly never written lyrics and worked with a composer. All of that was new. The economy became more and more difficult for this kind of film, such that I would say it's a miracle that a film like this got made at all. But I think the real challenge for me, and you said I set myself challenges, Norman, is that I guess, for better or for worse, I refuse to flinch. I feel like my task, the only thing that doesn't fill me with despair, is to look honestly at where we are as people, as a human family, as a beyond more than human family, life on Earth, and to explore those mysteries as deeply as my brain and my heart is capable. And that's hard and means that everything takes a long time and is painful, and probably painful for some of you who watch the work too.
But would you say, sort of also in retrospect, that the idea of making a musical made it easier for you, or it brought you more challenge than it actually brought you benefit? Because, I mean, musicals are not musicals. There's different genres. Obviously, there's a lot of it that goes back to the golden age of musicals, maybe from 1945 onwards. But musicals, and especially songs in musicals, can have different meanings and different ways of conveying thoughts and information and plot, and Demi uses it differently than Minnelli does, for example.
Yeah,
and
I use it differently from Demi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But was it clear to you from the moment you had that thought how you were going to utilize that genre, which is so present?
It was
in
an
American
exploration. Like everything I do, nothing is clear from the thought. But I've been thinking about this as this long project has emerged out of 8 years. That I've been thinking about vision. What is vision when you have an original idea? Because I don't think I could certainly not have envisioned how I would use song, the mechanisms, the principles by which that would get the characters singing, what the lyrics would be like, how the songs would relate to one another. I could not envision how the film would look. I could not envision the story. Maybe the deepest story I could envision, but not the plot. But at the same time, the finished film is an articulation, a full articulation that pleases me and saddens me, not because I'm disappointed in it, but because it's, I think, devastating, of what I want, the germ of the idea that I had that day in that bunker and on the plane back. I think, and that's really curious because so many people have brought so much to this. And locations have brought so much to it, and each of the actors have brought their inner lives to it and all of their craft. But somehow still there is something that stands in continuity with the initial inspiration. I think the issue the question about how music works, about this being a musical, for me, first of all, it absolutely has to be a musical. There's no version of this film which isn't a musical. I suppose if you took out the songs, you would have a bleak science fiction story of limited interest about a family struggling to survive the aftermath of apocalyptic environmental collapse. But the musical is what makes it about delusion, about the stories we tell ourselves, as I said at the beginning of the screening, to obscure the world from ourselves, to obscure our pasts from ourselves, to obscure, to ease our regrets. It's the fact that it's a musical is what makes it about a kind of false hope, a despair that masquerades as hope, a cognitive dissonance whereby each of us know daily with greater urgency the facts of the various crises that threaten not just the human species, but life on Earth. And at the same time, we don't believe those facts. I'm not talking about climate denial. I'm not talking about people who literally don't believe the facts, who consciously say, I don't believe the facts. I'm talking about the way we don't believe the facts each and every time we go about our lives as if these facts did not exist. And I'm not talking about the ways we might pretend to make meaningful change by, for example, recycling more or buying different things in the grocery store. I'm talking about, I guess, the ways, and this is something I learned when I was coming out as a gay man in the early 90s, and people were all in a community where in the United States and in Boston where I was living, where half the gay men were dying, and no one cared outside of the community. And living in this kind of quiet Holocaust, which I did not expect to enter the moment I came out, I joined a group called ACT UP and found that the only way to regain and assert my humanity in this moment was to actually put my liberty on the line. And every day, what we did in Boston ACT UP did many different things in its bigger chapters in New York and San Francisco. They were probably more effective. But what we did was the Sisyphean work of needle exchange. It was illegal to give out clean needles to injection drug users. And so we would go into these shooting galleries every day and hand out clean needles and collect dirty needles so that people would infect themselves less frequently with HIV. And we got arrested every single day. And so it was actually kind of every second day because often we had to spend a night in jail. And that experience, though, of finding a broader family than the nuclear family that was the cradle, my cradle as an economically self-interested, that is to say greedy, economic actor in a capitalist society, but finding a broader human family in solidarity through the risking of my own liberty. That experience, to me, remains vivid when I think of what the current conditions call for. So when I say that the fact that the end is a musical, it makes it about cognitive dissonance, it makes it about the ways we do not believe the facts we know. I mean, every time I don't go out and join Greta Thunberg in getting myself arrested in a port in Sweden where I live when they're shipping oil, and instead go out to dinner with a friend, I'm disbelieving the facts, and I'm deceiving myself. And this is not, I don't say this out of judgment. I don't say this out of meanness. I say this out of a deep empathy, actually, and kind of love for each and every human being who needs to find a way to live in this difficult moment and this time of great danger. But I do think we need to be doing much, much, much more. And so I think the fact that it's a musical is about this false hope, which is what makes it about this false hope that's kind of this key feature of the golden age version of the genre, where we tell ourselves everything will be fine. We act as though everything will be fine, even when we know that it won't be. And I think that's been baked into the form ever since it came into its kind of golden age. These musical spaces where class difference, racial animosity, deep historic injustice was sort of wiped away through song, where the kind of unearned optimism that, to cite a post-golden age musical, Annie, that the sun will come out tomorrow, no matter what, was always a lie. The musical reached its golden age at precisely that moment in human civilization where we developed, or my namesake developed the technology whereby we could, at the push of a button, obliterate all of us. It was always a lie. So the idea to make a musical in the bouncy, forward-looking tradition of a form that held America together at a time when nothing holds, neither America nor even a collective belief that there exists, even if we debate over it, something called the truth upon which we can make meaningful decisions about how to live together in a democracy, nor even the air that we breathe. That to make a golden age musical in that context is somehow about inviting you, anyone who sees the end, with the deepest, without judgment, to identify in the delusions and lies and fantasies that the characters in my film cling to, so that they can live with themselves. And in that sense, you know, the cliche about golden age musicals is that people sing when their truth is too big for words. They move into song. But in the end, like with the dramatizations in The Act of Killing, and we could talk about that separately, the characters sing out of crises of doubt. They're the stories that they're telling themselves to cope with what they've done start to fall apart when the girl arrives and brings with her honesty, the gift of honesty. And as those stories fall apart, the characters fall into crisis and they reach for music, new music, to console themselves, to reassure themselves that they're right, that their world of violence and extinction is actually in perfect harmony. And I think the way they do that is telling. The music that I think Joshua Schmidt wrote is luminously beautiful, but it's a lie. And the truth, instead of coming through the music, the truth of their feelings comes through the music, but the truth of their self-deceptions, the truth of the lies comes through the music. The real truth comes through the silence that interrupts the music, that stops them in their tracks, and that dominates really the last act of the film. And I just would say one thing then about how we learn the music, the songs would function. One of the things I realized, and Joshua Schmidt, the composer, realized with me as he sort of guided me on this very difficult, scary journey of writing lyrics, was that we're watching this idea that the songs are these crises of doubt, and that in at least 3 instances they're veritable breakdowns in song, that every line of lyric should be as dramatically active as the most intense line of dialogue in the most intense arguments or moments of conflict in the film. And therefore, I couldn't see a way of shooting the songs with cuts. You know, you might, if you were expecting kind of to look at the characters from an arm's length and from a place of moral superiority and kind of judge them as these are these awful rich people who've saved themselves at the expense of us, and reassure yourself that you're not like them, then you would expect satire, and you might be hoping for spectacle, musical spectacle, as in, like, I don't know, a musical satire like the Book of Mormon, which is for the theater. It hasn't been made for film, but I'm sure someday it will be, just because there's so much money in that. And I think it's a fine satire, the Book of Mormon, by the way, but then you would have all sorts of, you'd have dancing girls who would be the dead because no one's left in the bunker. You would have lots of cuts. But because we're actually watching people at their most vulnerable and at their most radiant as they deceive themselves tragically, it felt like if I can honor what sort of André Bazin said about the deeply cinematic being a kind of bearing of witness in real time, then I should. And when I had characters singing to each other, that set some really hard challenges for us, because I somehow didn't believe, even when they were in conflict, in shot, reverse shot. When there was song, I did in the spoken scenes, because I felt like if people are sharing a kind of harmonic bath together, a kind of harmonic universe, they're not really in conflict in the sense that's implied by shot, reverse shot. And I'm not saying, I'm using conflict in the broadest sense there, obviously. They're not in confrontation with each other. Because they're making music together. And so shot, reverse shot felt like, forgive me, but bullshit. When I looked at examples of it being used in musical, whether it was the recent Spielberg remake of West Side Story, or the excellent original film of Oklahoma, it just felt like the worst moments in those films is when you're cutting back and forth between people who are singing. So that led to some really interesting work with the songs and the staging and the lyrics and the cinematography and the lighting that we can look at if we want, if anyone's curious. But those principles emerged through the writing and through the writing, and then through the workshopping, and then through the month of rehearsal before the shooting.
Just by the way, you're very welcome to participate, and we suggest that you sing your questions. And I'm kidding, of course.
I'll totally sing my answers if someone sings.
Yes.
Oh, I won't be able.
I wish I had challenged you with that.
I'll completely do that.
But so moving from the conceptual parts maybe to the methodology and realizing what you thought out, and there's something that you said, or you've said many times, is like you like to create situations that are out of people's comfort zones to evoke authenticity and truth. something you did to great effect in your first two films, of course, by putting these perpetrators in situations where they would reenact crimes they committed, but sort of with the barrier between them of reality and fiction that they saw on television, and so on and so on. And I'm wondering if sort of as a filmmaker, in terms of a director of actors, that is something that you conceptualize then, putting your actors into situations that were out of their comfort zone. Because that maybe goes together with what you described as these one-take shots, which are conceptually, it's nice to think about them, but it's another thing to do them. And especially with actors who, as far as I know, most of them do not have formal training. So they may, I presume, have not immediately felt comfortable. Or did they? Or did you make them feel comfortable?
No. I don't think there's any actor or director, for that matter, who feels comfortable with some of the single takes we did. Maybe we'll look at one of them later, because they were really very, very, very hard. And no one is comfortable with it. I hated it. I'm not sure I would ever do that again. I think that no one does their best work when they're afraid, and including me. So when I had setups that involved extreme complexity, thank heavens we had a rehearsal period, because I could give myself a safety valve of another angle in case it really wasn't working. And on most of the scenes, almost every scene. And the actors knew they had that too. And with a couple harrowing exceptions. And I think, but I would really emphasize the safety, the sense of safety in this case, because, these were actors who knew all of the singing is live, and that's essential because it's actors, they're going through their most vulnerable moments of breakdown while singing, and to have to be coming up with emotions to match a track to which you're lip syncing would take away all authenticity and all scope for real discovery. So everyone knew they were being asked to do something very vulnerable, and I think the formal complexity of it being a musical and these long takes meant, to some extent, it meant that people were a little bit. It meant that it took me time. It probably took me the first couple weeks of a 9-week shoot where I was so worried about all the pieces working together that before I learned that where this work really intersects with my documentary work is by opening up a space where I'm inviting these incredible artists to surprise me, to bring me gifts, to show me things that, like I look for in documentary, I instantly recognize as authentic because it's not what I expect. And I always, in my documentaries, try to make basically the entire film out of such moments, such anomalies. And I think here too, the whole film ultimately is pretty much made out of that. But when I was preoccupied out of fear with the technicalities of these big songs, it was harder for me to just open generously that space for this cast, and I'm sure we had some moments of conflict and tension that were all amicable in the end, and everyone understood this was my first narrative film. But that's something that I think, yes. So I think everyone was pushed really far out of their comfort zone, and then my job was to make it as safe as I could, and that involved insisting we had enough time for rehearsal, that there was enough time for really deep work with a music department, which was incredibly supportive. So there was a woman, Fiora Cutler, who worked day in and day out with the cast to get them to almost have a kind of muscle memory for how to sing each of these, how they wanted to interpret physically each of these songs with their breath. Because learning to, you control, as a singer, you control volume like a bagpipe player by how quickly and how much air you push through your vocal cords using your diaphragm. That's not at all how I sing in the shower. and for them to learn how to translate in the moment emotional discoveries into the use of that instrument required a lot of rehearsal, a lot of time with the music team, and that kind of thing to make them feel safe, letting them know that I was open to whatever they needed. Also, the material's really painful. It's not easy. I mean, it's asking them to go as actors, as artists, into the depths of trauma that they've either experienced or imagined or daydreamed or heard of, depending on how they work, and live there for weeks and weeks on end. It was really, I think it was very intense for all of them, and the fact that they have to sing live just made them very vulnerable. So anything I could do to make it safe and comfortable and quiet and peaceful on set and not rushed was essential.
I think it works to wonderful effect, and the cracks in their voice and the cracks in their looks and their faces rings totally true, and not like something that you had created sort of out of your mind, but something that was created within the process, and which makes it all the more devastating, of course. You know? Please, you're very, very welcome to participate. Right there. We have a microphone.
You now told us how you basically take or help others handle their fears, but how do you deal with your own fears, like with films like that and also like the act of killing?
Well, it can be hard. I mean, the act of killing, during the making of the act of killing, there was a day when there was just a day where something cracked in me. There's a scene where Anwar Congo, the protagonist, demonstrates how he killed. Maybe let's watch it. Yeah, teddy bear. Yeah, shall I show it to you? It's just that's
scenes in the film. It's not in the shorter version, but in the longer cinema version, I think, right?
Yeah, and I think the shorter version's been pulled from all markets. I don't think it exists anymore, except probably on Pirate Bay. Let's see, here we are. So it's just this moment. I'll show it to you.
So just to set this up, this is a reenacting a scene that you had suggested to them, where with Anwar and Herman, I believe.
Yeah, Anwar and Herman. Anwar wanted to do film noir dramatizations of gangster gangster film dramatizations of what he did, and out of they couldn't get any of their friends to play a convincing victim. So Herman, who's kind of one of Anwar's proteges, a younger thug in this national paramilitary movement that grew out of the death squads that killed people in 1965 and in which Anwar was a leader, out of this came this downward spiral into self-pity and blaming the victim. And a game emerged where Herman plays suddenly, although he's not dressed for it, a mother who offers his child to be killed. But I'll just play how we came into it. It's hard to maybe see in this light, but this is a plane crash in the streets of Medan, Sumatra, Indonesia, where we made the film. I'll just come in before that. Anwar killed people by garroting them with wire, and he's demonstrating, and I'll just go backwards a little bit here. And he's demonstrating, he's pulling wire, and he's exerting himself as he does so. And there's also something about how this film, The Act of Killing, and actually The End, and actually The Look of Silence, evolve into kind of fever dreams. And there's something tonally that I work with where I always feel it's very important to set that tone up early in the film and to remind the viewer of it several times along the way. And this is heading into the kind of, the final abyss, and Anwar is, so there's a kind of dreamlike logic at work here. So we'll just play the transitions in and out of this scene, and then I'll talk to you about the fever dreams that this gave me, and then I'll answer your question from that. There was this sense that in the first clip we saw where he's pulling the wire, it was hard for him, painful for him, to carry out the act of killing. and it gave him nightmares. And in this sequence, this scene with the teddy bear, I had the feeling that he was suddenly blaming his victims for hurting him. By killing you, it hurts me, so it's your fault. You're the barbarian. And he then sings this song of self-pity with the little wind-up chicken, and that sort of inevitably lands him in where he's been destined from the beginning of the filmmaking, which is to play the victim. But that idea that his conscience, that it's hard, awful to kill, could actually make him worse, could fuel the cycle of violence, was so terrifying to me. I think that's what it was, and that was after a lot of reflection on it, that I went home that night and I had this awful nightmare and continued, and then couldn't sleep the rest of the night. And the next day was so afraid of having I knew I was going to have the nightmare again, which has never happened to me, but I just knew it. I'm going to bed, I was like, I'm going to have this dream, and I couldn't sleep that night either. The next night I collapsed and just, I think, slept fine. And the next night I didn't. I did have the nightmare again, or a version of it. And it just kept going, that cycle, for like pretty much over a year. And so there's the pain of digging so deep. And I think and making the end was painful in other ways, because we were really, all of us, drawing from ourselves. There's a lot in Sun's character, that George Mackay's character, that's really personal and to me, and a lot that we talked about while preparing the film. And I think what makes the films hard to make emotionally is connected to sort of what's at the heart of my project, that I only really actually articulated last night in a discussion with a friend, the critic who's here, Roger Koza. And I'd never really thought this before, but he asked me a question that got me thinking. And I was thinking about how, he asked, like, is the end about very rich people, or is it about all of us? Is the act of killing about a mass murderer, or is it about all of us? And my first answer was both. And then he said, well, why, if you want to make films about all of us, why choose these very extreme examples to anchor your films? And I said, I thought about it. I didn't know. I didn't have an answer ready, but I thought, but it came clear to me. I was like, I realized I have a fascination with extreme wrongdoing, because I feel that if I can present that with empathy and even with, I would say, love, not always warmth, because sometimes the camera really steps back in horror and lets things unfold, but love, and at the very least, the courage to remain and bear witness, that it offers all of you, but also me, and that's where it's hard for me in the process, and I think hard for the cast or the participants in the case of Anwar and Adi and the people and my crew. It offers all of us a chance, or it invites all of us to recognize patterns of behavior, misdirection, in the case of these three films, self-deception in ourselves, that we have in ourselves, to recognize those patterns in the characters, to recognize those aspects of ourselves in the characters, in the participants, in the case of the documentaries. And that, I think, has the power, I hope, for some of you, to make you suddenly self-conscious, self-aware about patterns of behavior that are so habitual that they're invisible. Because suddenly you see how this kind of misdirection, this kind of lying, this kind of self-deception, this kind of subtle gaslighting hollows out a family and undermines everybody's capacity to love and to have live a meaningful life when we only have one chance to live a meaningful life on an earth that is still, for the moment, beautiful. And the idea that by showing people that the patterns of behavior that are most destructive in a man like Anwar Congo or in a family like the one in the end are things we all share, I hope to kind of denaturalize, to make us aware of those aspects of ourselves so that we have a chance, so that first of all we feel implicated, we feel we recognize our own complicity, because until we recognize how we are implicated, how we are complicit, we won't change. We won't do the work we need to do on ourselves. And I think the fact that the characters have done such extreme things can, for some people, give us seemingly permission to say, oh, well, this isn't about me because I haven't killed 1,000 people and I never would. But I hope the way we look at the characters, maybe not Anwar in that particular scene, but elsewhere in the movie, and particularly toward the end of the movie, I hope the way we look at the characters makes all of us know that the real truth of the film is that we may wish that if we were born and grew up in these people's families, we would make different choices, but we're extremely lucky never to have to find out. And more than that, once you have that realization, then you open the door to recognizing yourself and your behavior in their behavior. And I think what's especially maddening for people who want to hold the end at the family in the end at arm's length and say this is really about rich people who are saving themselves. What's maddening is that the mother is a kind of bridge character. She hasn't done the extreme thing. She hasn't run a multi-billion-dollar oil empire like the father, but she has not brought her family along. And in a certain way, all of us, not all of us, but many of us will face a moment where we know one of our parents or both of our parents would love to live with us as they get old. And maybe we make the necessary and right decision by instead putting them in a care home and visiting them. But it's also heartbreaking, and we're lying to ourselves if we say, it's okay, they'll be fine. And every time we lie to ourselves about a relationship that important, we undermine our ability to maintain that relationship. We hurt that relationship. And maybe we have no choice but to do that with our eyes closed, lying to ourselves, is to give up your chance to live a real life. And I'm really like a very old-fashioned. I'm like a follower of Socrates. The unexamined life is not worth living. It's what I think. And I fail at that standard, as we all do each and every day, but I strive for it, and that makes it really hard. And then there's the issue that, yes, this was also a big challenge to make a film like The End, and I had to start meditating 2 years before, because this experience making the look of the act of killing started a process of insomnia in my life, and I was afraid I wouldn't sleep throughout the whole shoot, and I would therefore fuck it up. So I started meditating to try and deal with insomnia. And it worked, actually, by the way. So if any of you have insomnia, I really recommend 15 minutes of meditation at the end of every day. It cured my insomnia.
Conceptualizing and making a film.
Do that too.
Do that too.
And you can test whether the meditation...
No, what's interesting, because you describe in very eloquent words the feeling I had when I saw The End, and I went in with expectations, and some of them were realized and some weren't, but it's immensely fascinating just to look at it, the way it's done and the way they act and the way... And then towards the end I had tears in my eyes, because I, deep inside of me, kind of realized that was also your intention, but it was maybe even more your intention of exposing that and triggering that in everybody to reflect on every day, the lies you tell, the self-denial that you live, and all those things. And that went very near to me personally. And now I never lost the bigger picture of the film and never lost the admiration of what you've done, but I'm very thankful for what it sort of left behind on a very personal level. Anyway, we had another hand up in the air, right over there in the back. No, sorry, over here first, and then in the back, please.
Just after watching this clip, it just feels very banal to ask something else. But Yeah, no, another question came up because you have like very deep philosophical concepts that you want to put in your film, and you've done now a fiction and two documentaries. Could you talk about like which one were you more happy with, or because you have the experience to say that, and the other one is the cinematography of the end. I thought it was just marvelous and just so elegant, and just from a documentary where you have to react so much about what is happening to creating a whole world with like a studio, I guess you shot in. Could you talk about
3 weeks were in a salt mine.
Yeah.
That place where he's climbing is a salt mine where we spent 3 weeks.
But
yeah.
the apartment they're living in?
Those are sets.
Yeah, but
because they have no windows, so you have to build that.
Could because it felt just like so difficult to, because did you know how to shoot the film and then build the apartment, or did you just build the apartment and
No, we kind of knew how to. We designed the set. Michal Krichman, Misha, and I. Misha's an amazing. Like if you want to work with like the most lovely, present, brilliant, caring, humble cinematographer on earth, it's Michal Krichman, who is, you'll also know maybe from Andrei Zvyagintsev films Leviathan and Loveless. He now lives in London. He left Russia because of the war, as did his family. And we spent, I think cumulatively, but over like a year and a half, spread out, 5 months, really thinking through how we were going to shoot every scene, revising it as the scenes changed, doing the songs last because that was hardest. And the ideas for the set evolved, like to suit how we could make the scenes interesting. And in collaboration with Jette Lehmann, the production designer. So the layout of the house, of the main apartments where you have the father's office and the diorama room, and then you have a living room and a dining room. I can't remember what scene that was designed to serve, but it may have been this one. And just as a very short scene, because I feel like I'm spending too much time showing clips, but I'll show you a very short scene, which is here. Here. It maybe was designed, not this one, but the next, to serve.
I tried. I had no choice.
Please,
Wait, sorry, I'll just jump over this. This. Oh, whoops, sorry, it's speeding up. Here we are.
So this is basically the moment when they decide
To throw the girl out.
yeah.
Or they've decided to throw the girl out. They decide to let her. Well, we'll come to that, but they're trying to throw her out. Yeah. So she comes down and realizes she's about to be thrown out, and she turns the other way and runs down this tunnel. This is in the salt mine, and then there's a cut to the set.
Come and hold her legs.
Okay.
Your belt. Give me your belt.
No, please, I'll stop.
No, I don't want to do this.
Could you help me, please?
That's enough. Look at her.
I said that's enough. Stop. Now.
So I think this figuring out how to shoot this scene in one shot was one of the key moments that gave us a clue as to how the architecture of the set should be. And we and by the time we built the sets, they were strong ideas for all the complicated scenes. And then those evolved in rehearsal. We had a month of rehearsal where we taped we had an empty stage where we taped the outlines of the set on the floor, and we read the scenes, we improvised around the scenes while some of the cast was in music rehearsal and dance rehearsal, and then we blocked, but we tested the blocking with just boxes piled up to create doorways, and the cast holding their scripts except for Michael, who has like a photographic memory and can read a scene. He read the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln's speech, once when he was, I think, 8 and knew the whole thing in one read. That's when they realized he was kind of a genius, which they're all geniuses. But yeah, so, and you asked, did you ask which I'm most happy with?
Because you aim for such big topics and deep thoughts, and which do you think achieves that for you more, this depth of conversation with the audience, or what you're trying to convey?
It's early to say. I love all three, and I think of The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence as one. I don't have, and one thing I really resist when I supervise PhD students in film, and when they come with a kind of philosophy they're trying to illustrate through the film, I think it's exactly backwards. They should discover their philosophy through the making of the film. And what was beautiful about the conversation with Roger that I mentioned, Roger Koza that I mentioned from last night, was that I had this idea about why I work with extremes and how that allows us to, and humanizing the extreme allows us to see how we are part of the problem, but also how those behaviors must be toxic because they're causing this, but I'm also doing it with my sister in a way that's not necessarily causing the end of the world, but is ruining that relationship. I'll just go on a little tangent, but I'll come right back to what I was about to say, which is that I realized also this morning in reaction, building on that the end is really, really a film about love. It's about how lying and dishonesty eviscerates, hollows out, destroys, corrupts love. And I have a very loving relationship, which has been a pole star for me. It's my husband, Shu, has been with me for 26 years, and the relationship remains magical. And we just rewatched the Before trilogy by Linklater, and I was really disturbed by the third film in the trilogy because it's sort of, there's kind of an acceptance of a deeply compromised relationship at the end. And I don't want to settle for that. And there's all sorts of resentment that's big and that some of you will have in your lives with your partners. I have with people I love, some people I love, and we should try, as scary as it is, to find the honesty to move past that. And I think the end is about the failure of love due to dishonesty within a family, but also how inherently when we try to save our own families and tell ourselves the private family is the source of human safety, we deny our dependence, and if not bonds of love, but bonds of attachment and solidarity and brotherhood and sisterhood, fellow humanity with the broader human family. And that lie undermines our capacity to love and live, as I keep saying, meaningful lives. So these ideas I didn't have and could not have said before I finished the end, before last night even. So in a certain way, I'm sure I'll make a film that I don't like one day, but when I do make a film, it always feels like I'm building on what I knew to something bigger. And so I've always loved best the most recent because it's the most present discovery for me. In terms of what this film is doing, it's really curious because it deeply divides critics. I notice that we get reviews that say it's a masterpiece, and we get reviews saying it's utterly stupid and garbage and a huge disappointment from someone who we had such high hopes for. And but there's nothing in the middle. There's I haven't seen anything that says, oh, it's pretty interesting, but it's a little boring here and there. And I feel like what I see in the audience, and has been rapt attention, emotion, and people really feeling like they're seeing something that they connect with in a new way. And so it's too early to say what'll have the biggest impact. The only thing I can say is that The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence, I was incredibly honored to be part of making something that had the impact of helping to transform the way a country understands its past. I can't ever expect that again, and I never expected that in the first place. So I guess that will be the pinnacle of my life, as in my working life. not in its filmmaking, but in what it did.
I have to confess, some parts are also really funny.
Yes, good.
And I think I want to talk with you or ask you which scene is the funniest for you, and also what's about the humor, because I think humor possibly is also a dividing part, also possibly for the critics, because I think the other films you did before, I couldn't find myself laughing. Also, it's also very absurd, yeah? But it's not to laugh. This is also to laugh, and meanwhile I laugh, I feel a little bit not guilty, but a little bit. The laughing starts to freeze.
Well, there was laughing. I'm glad about the laughs. There was a lot of laughing, especially in the screenings in the United States and Canada and London. The audience was really laughing through the film until the end, when it sort of a hushed silence descended. I think the act of killing and the look of silence, I'm sorry you didn't feel permission to laugh. In Indonesia, there's a lot of laughing all the way through. And it's at the same time a lot of tears and a lot of shock and a lot of outrage and a lot of pain. But there's always laughter. And I think that speaks to how I try to use laughter. I try to use laughter not in the editing, in the microscopics of the editing, and this is a smaller point, but I use laughter sometimes to release energy so I can build up again. And that's very deliberate, and I think of it with my editor. And when the laugh doesn't come, I get nervous that the audience isn't going to have the energy for the next build. But that's a technical use of laughter. If you take a brilliant satire like Dr. Strangelove, it would be interesting to think what laughter's doing there. Like, is it cathartic? Is it sentimental in the strict sense that it's helping us understand where we stand as a community of viewers? I'm not sure, I'd have to think about it, but I don't think I use laughter in that way. I think I use laughter to bring you closer to the characters, and that's why it freezes and it becomes more painful. So there's different kinds of laughter, and I've never talked about this with The End, but I certainly have with The Act of Killing, and I think it's the same two types of laughter. There's absurd laughter where you can't believe the craziness of the situation. And for me, the funniest scene, since I won't show the scene, but for me, the funniest of such scenes is this one, the dinner, where mother is desperate to apologize for them trying to throw the girl out, but she's also totally traumatized. And the father's trying to act like everything's great. It's also, I think, one of the greatest performances, if not the greatest performance in Tilda's career. But yeah, maybe. I think that's hilarious. Then I think there's moments like where characters do something so open and generous, and in The Act of Killing, it could be Herman sitting in a bright pink dress singing a song, and talking about how the dancing girls who are rehearsing the perpetrator's musical number are just so hot, and how it's good for a fat guy like him, which is what he says. And that just makes us sort of love him because he's so open. And in the end, maybe it's when the girl is, the son is trying to play with the girl in the salt mine, and he farts accidentally, and the girl says, no, don't worry, and farts to the rhythm of music, something that I confess I do sometimes to delight Shu, and she names it. Have you never? Yeah, of course. I said I would sing the answers to you, too. So that's a funny, that's funny because the same reason you just laughed at me, that I was open with you. It's funny because she's open and she has no shame, and that's the character. She comes into the bunker with the gift of being able to express guilt, needing to express guilt without shame. And the difference is crucial. In English, we hardly distinguish between those two words, but guilt is, of course, remorse, and shame is a concern with how you look in the eyes of others. and everyone in the bunker's in a prison of shame, and girl is not, until she decides the only way she can find acceptance and peace is through forgetting her past and entering that prison of shame at the end. And so I think those two types of humor, the absurd humor and the humor where you just love a character because they're so open-hearted with you. Another example of that with the girl, where the girl gives and mother give us a laugh, is one of my other very favorite scenes. I'll show that because it's so short and it's so beloved to me. I think it's maybe my very favorite scene in the film is this one. Let me just see. I'll come to the end of this one. So Sun has just asked, everyone's starting to open up in a way that you never thought was possible because the girl has transformed life in this place.
What is that?
Oh, sorry, I'm a little too early. And now they're getting ready for New Year's. And Sun has just asked his mother the ultimate taboo question. What was your mother like? She never talks about her family, and it's too painful for her to talk about. And there's this sadness, and it's almost a dangerous sadness, but she tries but can't. And then we get another funny moment where Father and Butler dance, and then there's moments that are sort of in between. Like you asked earlier, did I ever know how a song would be staged? There's a song where Father and Butler and his butler, his sort of manservant, have this fantasy, sort of the butler comes out as gay, never lived his life for himself, never was able to be honest about his sexuality, and they find this moment of communion where they're each fantasizing about the person they love but have kind of lost, father, mother, because their relationship has become estranged. Butler, this man he never met, and they fall into this shape, which is just like, I'll just show you that too because we're having fun. And I'll prove myself a liar here. This is one of my very favorite songs in the film. This is like a song where I closed my eyes literally after I wrote it and thought, how would I stage this? And that whole staging came to mind. And it really didn't change. Now, what caused Michael a near breakdown on set was that somehow having to figure out how to stage George when he sings that bit of counterpoint, as he walks through, our idea didn't work, and I couldn't come up with another one for about 3 hours on the day. What seems so simple, him crossing the set, meant that Michael wasn't in a great mood when we started this day of shooting, but we were fine. But that image of them together like that, in longing, but singing past each other, just came to me in a flash. And that's something that's at once absurd and generous and open. You don't expect that kind of intimacy from either of them. So that's humor that I think disarms us. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. I use humor to draw attention to the absurdity of things, but also to disarm, so that our defenses are gone. And that kind of humor makes things, is not cathartic because it's not a release, it makes things more painful. And that's different, I guess, from Dr. Strangelove. You know, at the very end of the film, I won't show it because I think we've watched plenty, but at the end of the film, they have a final song. And if you watch that song without knowing anything about what's happening, about the plot, you would see people who are lying to themselves. You would see people telling themselves they're happy until they end, the mother and the girl staring into the nothingness of the salt mine. And I think I was talking about love and the compromising of love and how it's universal and how we compromise relationships when we hurt each other and can't admit it, and then gently, as I said earlier, gaslight each other to pretend it never happened. That, I think if you get to the end of this movie having laughed with the characters and for the characters, by the very end, the feeling that I hope is heartbreaking when you talked about being moved at the end is just the question, the sense when you see them, they say they have everything, they say they're happy, but it's really not enough. They have all that's left in the world that's inhabitable, but it's not enough because they've hollowed out everything they have, and now they're in denial of that.
I hate to say it, but those are kind of perfect final words. Yeah, I think I would like to end the end here. Sorry to do this again. Thank you so much for being here, Joshua. Thank you for agreeing to do this talk, and thank you for making this film. It'll come out in March, released by Stadtkino Filmverleih, and I urge you to see it if you haven't, or see it again if you have, and obviously recommend it. And thank you for being here and coming and asking questions, and thanks again to you, Joshua.
Thank you so much.